that area under our zoning regulations.
So, and most likely that area of the town, I mean, I know it's only a few streets, but it would be probably R1 zoning?
I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Emerson because there is probably somewhere in the state code specific language as to how that would have to be accomplished.
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
The question is, if the town was unincorporated and became part of the county from a zoning perspective, the process for zoning what was formerly the town of Port Royal under our zoning ordinance, how that would be accomplished.
I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I suspect that the zoning would stay as it is now unless someone rezones the property pursuant to the statutes and the process that we have now.
Okay.
We need to look at that.
Okay, all right. And the reason why I'm getting at, I guess basically, and I'll make it simple, is if the town unincorporates, we would now, their water system would become our water system, correct?
In theory, yes, there would have to be some mechanism as to how that property was accounted for.
So we would have to, I mean, the U.S. Army...
Thank you for trying to answer, Mr. Fincham, but we know that's really a Mr. Emerson question.
Okay.
If they unincorporate?
Well, the process to unincorporate is probably not quite as simple as what everyone seems to be thinking that it is. And again, this is not something that we've researched, so please don't hold me precisely to what I'm saying. But the code seems to indicate that a prerequisite to doing this, to doing an unincorporation of a town, is to have the town council and the county reach an agreement as a condition preceding to doing anything else. And presumably some of these issues would be taken care of in that agreement. Then the town council has to vote to unincorporate. And then essentially the question is submitted to all of the residents of the town in a referendum as to whether or not they want to vote to unincorporate or not. And if they do vote to unincorporate, then that goes to the court, and the court approves that and enters it. If they vote not to do that, then the opposite happens.
I guess, and I'm a little bit confused about it, but if they can't pay for their water system, and the pipes have been around since 1942, and they can't pay for the water system, then who's going to pick up the bill? I mean, I would imagine that it would be the parent government, which would be Caroline County.
I don't know the answer to that offhand.
I mean, they have pipes, and I mean, your pipes have been around, the pipes in Port Royal have been around since 1942, right? They've not, and the water tower, correct, since 1942. And
Jim, could you just use the mic so we can? I mean, we heard you, but just for those who listen. And
sorry, I was saying yes. The pipes are old. They are undersized. They are a mixture of some plastic, some cast iron, some steel. They, with their age, probably aggravated by the earthquake, though who knows where that's responsible. As I said, we had over $11,000 in repairs last year for damage in 2011.
So it's either your headache or our headache.
It's our headache, and we'd like to keep it our headache.
Right.
But
yeah, I know.
if we have no choice,
yeah,
you've got it.
Okay. Now, as far as Mr. Emerson, this might be a question for you or Mr. Fincham. Going back to that, what if the town incorporates the assets of the town, any buildings the town owns, insurance on those assets, those would also, I would imagine, become county headaches? Or county...
Assets?
Yes.
Assets and liabilities. The only thing the town owns is the town hall.
Process.
And what else?
We have the town hall, and then the town green is a block that belongs to the community. It was deeded in the setup that was going to be a community area. So on that town green sits our town hall. We also have a lease with HPR for the old doctor's office that was just revamped, which will be a welcome center and a museum for medical. And that's also where we have an agreement with the Port Royal Volunteer Fire Department, and their building is on that town green also.
Okay. And Mr. Fincham, I think you can actually answer this one. I've only got one or two more. As far as Port Royal remaining its own separate entity, an incorporated town, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, and I've asked you this before, but when there's grants in the county, and I know they failed, but when there's grants applied for, if Port Royal is on, if the county and Port Royal apply together for a grant, do we have a better chance of that grant, or Port Royal itself, and do we benefit from that? I mean, because it's an LMI area, correct?
A lot of the grants are LMI based, yes,
Right.
sir. And depending on what agency or department is administering the grant and the criteria, if LMI is a major component of that grant, then assuming there are no other standards or requirements out there to the contrary, it would be better for Port Royal in and of itself to make application because of the percentage of the LMI standard for the town versus the county as a whole. But there may be situations where, depending on the requirements of the grant, that it would be beneficial for the two to apply.
Didn't they just receive one dealing with,
Boat ramp.
what's that, the boat landing, but they were supposed to, Mayor Long, and, I mean, as far as the, aren't you doing something with, along the shoreline?
Yes, we're working on plans for, to be called Port Royal Landing for a fishing pier and a soft launch. And we just received a second grant for $28,000 toward that project from the Chesapeake Bay Gateway funds. So we're looking forward to starting that this spring, which will give the county its first public and only public access to the river. So I hope you all will be there when we dedicate that. Still have a little more fundraising to do, but we've got enough to get started.
Okay, I appreciate it. That's it for now. Thank you.
Underwood? Oh, I thought, Silly, you had more?
I just a couple of questions. And Mayor Long, the scoring on the last grant really hinged on the financial liabilities of the town and the ability for it to grow. The way I saw that scorecard, those were the things that hit the hardest.
Right. And I'm going to let Jim address questions on that, simply because he attended the meeting where we reviewed the application with us.
Okay.
But that certainly was one of the things that was come up.
You're right. The limited finances of the town played a major role in us losing the grant in two respects. First, the lack of our being able to provide certainty that we would have the resources to maintain the system if it were installed. And the community division had been very clear from the beginning that they were not going to provide a grant to install a system unless they could be certain it would be properly maintained in the future. The second place we lost money is at looking at what was, to put it grossly, how much skin we had in the game, how much of the money we were providing versus how much we were looking for from the state. Given our financial situation, we were putting in very little other than a lot of unpaid work hours. And clearly, if the town had been putting in more by being able to either have some funds of its own or at least the ability to get a loan to provide some matching to the grant, we would have scored better in that respect.
Because I noticed that the scores, most of them seem to be hinging on the financial viability of the town in the different categories.
Absolutely. That was the primary objection. I will mention the LMI one, the town is 69% LMI by the standards that they
moderate income?
use.
Right.
Low moderate income.
Okay.
Which is considerably higher proportion than the county. So we did fairly well on that aspect.
Right. And I saw, because I looked at the scorecard that we all got a copy of, basically. In terms of I guess, water viability and aside from water viability, the ability to just maintain the town, street lights, town hall, the green, all that, all of that does come into play as well in the incorporation of the town. And I think that we're all focused on water. We're not focused on the rest of the things that need to take place on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis there that we all take for granted here. So I don't want to lose sight of that. There is cost there as well. And I guess my last thing is with the new state water regulations regulating wells. Them having their own water system and their own well is one less one that we have to actually apply for and maintain, which I think is going to become a problem in the future. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Seeley. Mr. Underwood? I have none, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Akers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Long, if you would, a couple of questions. It's my understanding that the boundary adjustment has changed from the original one that was suggested to the board. How many acres does it include now? And out of that number, how many acres of agricultural land is included in that now?
It has changed a couple of times, and your planning department did the last change based on our last meeting. When I did the figures, it included the wildlife refuge. We were talking about 450 acres. We've taken out the wildlife refuge, moved another line over a little bit according to the new map. So I don't have an exact number for you. I'm going to guess, Mike, about 350, about 363, 360 to 380 acres. The three fields Mr. Ellis was speaking about, I believe one's a 120-acre field, one's about a 42 or 48-acre field, and the other one is 62 acres, I believe. And as we have said, the zoning would not change. We've already talked about that, and he would still be able to rent the farms. Nothing's going to change unless the owners decide to sell and request a zoning change, and that's in whatever the comprehensive plan says for the future growth. But certainly nobody is forced to do anything with their property they don't want to do as far as selling or not selling. So he's fine there. And I have spoken to Mr. Holloway, who is one of the owners of the 125 acres, since he wrote that letter. And we have talked, and those were his concerns. Could he still rent out the farm? Could he still hunt on it? And so I think he's feeling much more comfortable with the boundary line adjustment.
Now, the town of Port Royal does not have a property tax. Do they?
No, we do not.
Okay. So I guess my question is, why do we need 360 to 360 and 380 acres, number one, and by my additions, based on the numbers you gave me, 222 of them roughly are going to be agricultural zone, which will never change. So why would you want the town want that additional acreage when there's not going to be a possibility of getting any revenue from it?
Well, I wouldn't say the agricultural would never change. I remember when you used to drive out Route 3 and there were dairy farms on both sides. Things do change as the future grows. But one of our concerns is keeping the character and having a green space that we could zone and control and plan for in the future if owners did decide to buy or to grow. The other thing is the commercial area down 301 is very skinny. I mean, it's really narrow on that agricultural side. With current regulations for setbacks and turning lanes and parking, to try to get a business in there, there's no depth. So taking that in, if we can encourage a business to locate on 301, they would have the option of contacting a landowner to see if they would sell off maybe a few acres of that agricultural land to provide them with enough room for a turning lane or parking area or that type of thing. So that was one of our thoughts with taking in that big open field, to one, have a nice big open green space that we control, but also to have some plans for the future and to allow for that 301 area to grow some.
Okay. Now, the water system that And I appreciate that, and that certainly clears up some of the issues that I had. But the water system that you were planning to improve to, should you have received the grants, how much is that going to cost? Do you have any estimates, or did you have any estimates as to how much that would cost?
The grant price, and I'm sorry, I didn't think we were going to make comments tonight, so I didn't bring any of my notes. The original grant was $900 and some $1,000, and that was for Phase 1. That was with providing an elevated water tank, which would also provide for fire suppression, which with old structures and the trailer parks, and also hoping to attract new businesses, were strongly recommended to us by the engineer and by your utility director. Then the second phase was going to be to apply for a grant to replace the pipes, which really are in as bad a shape, if not worse, than the tower. And the estimate the engineer came up for that was $2.18 million. Because we're dealing with having to work with 301 and bore underneath roads and that type of thing. So it's going to be labor intensive and on replacing the pipes.
Okay. Any questions?
Taylor, you have some more questions?
Well, I don't have any more questions. I just would, well, maybe I should wait and let you do it and then.
That's fine. That's fine. Since you don't have any questions, I wanted to ask some questions. Madam Mayor, I would just wait until you sat down before I ask you to come back. You said it's a couple of things. You said, and we've got this before, I just want to make sure we've got all the facts. Since the bank left, you lost how much money in revenue? You said 8,000?
No, it was about 8,000 a year. And our budget was about 30,000, so we lost about a third of our budget, about 30% of our budget.
Okay. So if the bank hadn't left, you probably would have been okay?
Well, we would have been sustaining like we have been, and we might have been able to qualify for a loan to pay for at least a ground system.
Okay.
For the tower.
It's a possibility.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Heimbach, you said that the town was 69% LMI, which I'm actually looking at the scoring from the grant, which is 100 LMI residents divided by 104 people, 144 people in the whole thing equals 69%. But in that particular section, you scored very low. You could have gotten 60 points and you only got 30 points. Do you have an explanation?
Yeah. You never know how many points you'll get for that sort of thing because they take all of the grant proposals received in the LMI percentages and rank them all and then divide them. I believe it was into fifths, into 20th percentile, and we were in the second fifth. The reason is quite straightforward. We were asking for a grant for which the whole town benefits, low income, high income. Many of the other grant proposals were for small sections of a municipality or a county, and in most cases a particularly low income section. And so it might very well have been 90% low income or whatever. So compared to those, we didn't stack up all that well.
Okay. 'Cause it just says here the highest was 60, the next was 50, the next was 40. Lower middle is where you ranked at 30 points, then lowest 20, and lowest was 10.
Yeah, those are points, though, not percentages.
Right, they're points.
Right.
Of the 60 points you could have gotten, you got 30. Okay. While you're here, a couple of other questions on this report, and I don't know who has it, but at the end of the report that we have, I guess these are the evaluator's notes and things that he mentioned. Well, before I do that, because that's going to get to my last question. Before I do that, you understand the town of Port Royal has no rights to annexation because you don't provide any services in the county?
We understood that.
If you provided services in the county, this would be a totally different conversation, wouldn't it?
I am not a lawyer. I can't tell you what what the conversation would be or what the implications would be of that situation.
I'll help you out. I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express, but I have been through an annexation for the county. What happens is if the town or that particular entity provides service into the county, they basically have a right to annex that area that they provide services. That happened with the town of Bowling Green and the county 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. So Bowling Green provided water into the county. Bowling Green said they wanted that particular area. I bring that up because that's not the case for Port Royal.
That's with one probably minor exception. I believe it's the only exception. We provide water for River Haven, which is located on a piece of land that was part of the county and the town until it was retroceded to the county at the time the bridge was constructed.
Okay.
So we do provide water to that. As far as I know, that's the only thing outside the town.
Jenkins and Banks.
Okay.
And for also 2 residents that are right on our boundary line
On the other side of
in the county.
River Haven is what used to be Buster's, which is the one
Right.
restaurant that sits on the water right there.
And then on the other end, near the line with the county and the town, are 2 residents that are hooked up to our system.
Okay. But I mean,
Overall, you're correct. We do not provide services beyond the town boundaries with those very minor exceptions.
Thank you for that. Part of what the, I guess, reviewer said is, and I'm trying to read his or her handwriting, so that's a challenge in itself. But it says the credibility of the research methods and survey is suspect, no instrument provided. Do you know what they meant by that?
Yeah, we do. And as a matter of fact, the George Washington Regional Commission, Kevin Burns, was quite irritated by that remark. They were commenting on the fact that the survey instrument, which was designed by the George Washington Regional Commission, working with the person from the community division, who was the active person at that time, had been agreed to. We didn't include a copy of it with the proposal, or sorry, with the grant proposal, because the division had already seen it and approved it. But there'd been a change of personnel down there, and the current people apparently did not realize that their predecessors had previously seen the instrument. So that's what that was about, and as I said, Kevin was quite upset.
I would imagine so. Okay, the next one says, tell us about your capacity. Well, one, it says the rates are too low now. Plans are to increase them, but there's no meters. These are just things that they said in your report. But then the last thing they said, or the last thing for me, is they question your ability to maintain an upgraded system. And then it says probably needs to be taken over by county.
Well, let me address
What did they
actually
say to
both
that?
of those. You didn't actually ask a question about the first statement. They were incorrect. There are meters.
Okay.
The base rate that people pay includes enough gallons per month that is relatively rare for a residence to exceed that and have to pay anything based on the meter reading. Almost always they're within the amount that's covered by the basic amount. We had raised our rates effective in June, I believe it was. Yeah. They gave absolutely no points for future plans. The possibility of the boundary change or our increase in rates along with our stated commitment to increase them again next year. So those comments dealt with what the status at the time. And yes, what you're observing is exactly what Jeff Steele had been asking about earlier. They were very concerned that we would not have the ability to maintain the system given our financial resources. Again, they assumed that the boundary change would not happen. Or alternatively, they simply did not assume that it would happen. And on that basis, they felt that if the resources were going to be available to maintain the system, it was going to have to come from the county rather than the town. Now, we firmly believe that should the boundary change take place, that decision will be subject to reappraisal.
Okay. Have you at all considered, Mr. Black was the one who raised the worst case scenario. Have you at all considered just having the county take over the water system? And then you would reap the benefits of whatever growth came from an expanded water system?
Well, consider it. Do you want it?
I'm asking you. I don't want to give you $70,000 a year, I'm telling you that.
Well, let's say that you could give us...
Forever.
For $3 million for the water system. I would think we certainly would sit down and talk to you about that if you were interested. However, I guess my thought on it was trying to be what we have always been, a part of Caroline, but yet trying to maintain ourselves and be the town that we are. That the idea, if we could get a grant for 100% match, as opposed to 80% match, that would be beneficial to the county as well to us, and so we hadn't really looked at it the other way. But we certainly could.
I have a different opinion about that, and mine is, I guess, a somewhat more aggressive opinion. That wouldn't be a very attractive offer to me. The water system is one issue we have. It's not the only issue we have. Port Royal has a very limited future as it stands right now. It simply does not have the resources to grow and to become a more desirable place to live, a more desirable place to locate businesses. Just keeping our water system intact is not what the town needs to fulfill what we would like to imagine it could become. And that is a gateway town when people come into Caroline County from the north that will be welcoming, that will be attractive, that will be prosperous. And just having better water won't do that. We need, to fulfill that sort of promise, we need not just the water system we have now that is sufficient barely to support the population we have, not to be able to provide fire protection because we don't have the capacity for that, but a system that can provide fire protection, that will attract businesses to the area, will attract people, potential property owners to the area, and that can give us the possibility of really turning into a place to be proud of.
Well, and we share that vision with you. It's, you know, it's how do we make the best of both worlds? You know, our job is to support all of the county residents. So there's 144 county residents who happen to live in the town of Port Royal. Our job is to help take care of them. Your job is, as town council, to focus on what's best for the town. So if there were a compromise that, as Mr. Black said, if we give you this $70,000 a year, or whatever that number is once we get it, and then 2 years from now you say, oh, gee whiz, sorry guys, we can't sustain the water system with just the $70,000. No business has moved in. You know, you're scrambling on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. If there were not that issue of the water system, you could then focus all of your growth efforts on bringing in new business and not worrying about managing a water system. So I'm just curious, because I'd mentioned to Mr. Taylor, I think we actually have to sit down again before we go to a public hearing, because there are some things that the board members had said before they hadn't said today, like, if we give you the boundary adjustment, we don't, one of them said they didn't want it to take effect for 6 months, and another said they didn't want to take effect for another year. So we're already budgeting for this year, so if it doesn't take effect until July 1, that probably doesn't do you any good for the next grant cycle, because you don't have it anyhow. So.
And I thought in our discussions at our committee, we had talked about looking toward January the 1st, which would have been halfway through the year and easier for your budget. But regardless, I just want to correct one thing. You keep saying give the towns $70,000. Let's not forget that we are part of Caroline County. We pay our taxes to Caroline County. We pay our personal property.
Nobody doubts that at all.
We're not taking money out of Caroline County.
But yes, you are.
We are improving. No, we are improving a part of Caroline County, which really needs to change. People come across the bridge. We want them to realize the history and the beauty and the growth. And as far as attracting businesses, I don't have room to attract businesses. I have a narrow little strip on each side of 301. One side is backed up to residential property and goes down. I need an intersection to attract businesses. As a planner, you, and sitting on this board, certainly you understand that you need land to meet all the setbacks and to attract businesses. I don't think we can attract any thing other than little tiny businesses with the piece of property we have now. We need room if we are going to improve and grow and use our income wisely. We need a place to do it without interfering with the historic quality and vision and of the town that we are. I see nothing but possibilities of good things that the board's.
And a lot of things you've mentioned, a lot of things you've mentioned, the historic value of Port Royal, the tourism, the people coming into. We've basically given you access to Mr. Wilson and his staff, which is something we don't do for the town of Bowling Green because they've now hired their own person. But we did work for Bowling Green. We're giving you access to all of the county things that you need to help Port Royal grow tourism-wide, historically, and those sort of things. Purely math, the county has $40-some million now. Next year, if this goes through, we'd have $40-some million minus 70,000. So I'm giving that money to somebody. It's not going to be in the county perspective.
You're giving it to a section of Caroline County that needs support and improvement. The town, the council has never opposed improvements or serve against things that have been done in other communities in the area. I do not think we are asking for anything unreasonable, and I hope you can agree with me on that.
And I can agree with you on the fact that the county would like to help the town of Port Royal become much bigger and better than it is now. I think we would agree on that. Obviously, we're bouncing back and forth. We're never going to agree on the fact that you're going to get $70,000 from the county, which is my reality.
That is not a setback. If a restaurant closes up, it might not be that much. We don't know. Yeah. That's why we're getting an average.
And we are going to, we're going to ask Mr. Cully to work with Mrs. Carter to get an idea of what that number is to kind of help us. We're, as I said before, we're operating at a distinct disadvantage because Mr. Schiebel's on vacation this week, so we need some numbers that'll help us with the water system and things like that.
And I will tell you that Mr. Schiebel did serve on our task force committee for this study, so as far as the water system goes, and the fact that we also have, remember, we have a petition signed by all the businesses that would be affected by this boundary line adjustment. These business owners would like to see some of the meals tax and business tax they pay stay in the area where they work and strive because they feel it would be a good investment in their business, and I hope the county feels it would be a good investment in their business also.
Yeah. I don't want to prolong an unproductive argument, or debate. I don't want to call it an argument. I'd just like to make 2 points real quickly. Number one,
and you're thinking it's not going to be productive.
Arguably this boundary change is something that should have been made 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Rationally, the businesses that have grown up around Port Royal should be part of Port Royal. And it's our fault that that was not done, and we'll accept that responsibility. We're coming late to the game. If it had been a long time ago, done a long time ago, it would have been easier for everybody. But we've left ourselves constricted where we have a residential district, no business district. Second thing is, please don't focus only on the water system. If you're talking about the possibility of the county taking over town services, let's not forget our streetlights. Perhaps you could take over that system too. We'd like to be able to turn them back on. And we don't have the money to turn our streetlights on. And just the county taking over the water business would not give us the money to turn our streetlights back on.
That probably wasn't the good thing to say, because if you can't keep the lights on, how are you going to pay for a water system? Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Mr. Taylor has a comment he wanted to make in the end, and
I just
we look forward to more conversation.
Just in closing, a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to thank the board, as well as the town council, for coming and expressing their concern and asking for the boundary adjustment, and for the board obviously giving serious consideration to it. As the supervisor that represents Port Royal, which happens to be the town in the Port Royal district, I feel that it is our job as the board to do what we can do to assist any group of citizens with any issue that they have, regardless as to what it is. I have seen that ever since I've been on the board. I saw that tonight when Lake Caroline came with their concern about their water issue. I've seen it when Caroline Pines have come and the many other different subdivisions. Now, they weren't incorporated towns, but they were citizens. They were citizens in Caroline County who had issues. And they came, if you could just let me finish, Mr. Underwood, thank you. But when citizens came with their concerns, regardless of what their concerns were, the board addressed them. We've never turned anyone away. And I don't expect us to turn the citizens of the town of Port Royal away either. When it comes to the water system, the town could come in and ask us to take over that water system. And I guess we could agree to do that, even though I don't understand where that would make a lot of sense if you're going to spend $3 million as opposed to $70,000, even though the $70,000 may be continuing for years. But as it continues and the town grows and the land increases in value, so does the real estate tax. And the county, again, generates additional funding because of that. I see it as a win-win situation. I see it as a win for the town of Port Royal, for the historical value of the town. I would hate to see the county and the town lose the historical value. It's one of the oldest towns in the country, and it has a history and a legacy that's well worth saving. And I don't know how you equate that to $70,000, but I can tell you, if you've ever been to Port Royal on the 4th of July, you know what I'm talking about. You know the proudness, the things that the people in the town feel, and how dedicated they are to maintaining the town. The council has basically said that with this and a boundary adjustment, they believe with the additional funding that they will get, they will be able to maintain the town. They will be able to take care of their needs and pay for the services that they're trying to provide, and will not have to come back to the county for addition. So having said that, I think it's in our best interest to declare or set a date for a public hearing. When we plan for the public hearing, and the chairman has talked about maybe having another work session if the board feels they need one, I don't know. But if we look at the second week or the second meeting in September for the public hearing, if there is a need for a work session, we could possibly plan it within that time. So if a motion is in order, I would like to move that we plan the public hearing, the board's public hearing. Oh, and let me ask, does it have to go to the planning commission? Okay, so there's no need for a planning commission to have a public hearing. So I would move that we plan a public hearing for the board on the second meeting in September. And then between that time, if there is a need for a work session, we could schedule it prior to the second meeting of September. If I could get a second.
Second.
Well, don't you think there's a, well, okay, motion's made by Mr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. Akers. The second meeting would be the 24th of September.
The public hearing.
That's the second meeting in September is the 24th, so that could be part of your motion.
Right.
It's the 24th of September. My question was, don't you think before we have the public hearing, we do need a meeting with the town, because there are people who said, I think Mr. Akers was one who said he didn't think this should take effect until July 1 or
and
whatever.
I've had that discussion with the mayor. She knows where I stand on that issue. And I do have some other questions about how we can maybe get where you want to get but maybe not to the extent that you want to get to right now. I think we need to have, I do think we need to have a discussion and maybe have that at the